Tell you what, you beat me in a game and I'll marry you. The words, laced with bitter sarcasm, echoed in the cavernous lobby of Devo Holdings. Katerina Devo stood with her arms crossed, a cruel smirk on her face, aimed at the one person who couldn't fight back, the night janitor. He was standing over the company's $1 million chessboard, a soft polishing cloth in his hand. She had just come from dinner with Dominic Sullivan, the latest in a long line of wealthy, power-hungry suitors her father insisted she entertain. The pressure was suffocating. Secure the dynasty, Katerina. A woman can't run this empire alone. Her father's words felt like a noose tightening around her neck, so she'd lashed out. This man, this janitor, was just an object for her to vent her rage upon. He was nothing. The janitor, Jamal Mitchell, looked up. His face, the color of warm, dark brown, was blank, but his deep-set, intense eyes held hers for a beat too long. There was no fear in them, no shock, nothing. He simply looked at her, then back at the board, as if weighing her outrageous offer with the same quiet consideration he gave to a stray piece of dust. After a long, tense silence, he gave a single, barely perceptible nod. Then he turned, pushed his cleaning cart towards the service elevator, and vanished. He hadn't said a word. Katerina stared after him, her smirk fading. She had expected him to stammer, to look away, to be intimidated. His calm defiance was more infuriating than any argument. Shaking her head, she dismissed the insane moment. It was a stupid thing to say. Born of anger and too much wine at dinner, it meant nothing. She rode the elevator to her penthouse, put the man out of her mind, and went to bed. The next morning she swept into the lobby, her mind already on a 9 a.m. conference call when she froze. She walked toward the obsidian and ivory chessboard. It was pristine, just as the janitor had left it, but it wasn't the same. A single piece had been moved. A black pawn from the king's row now stood 2 squares forward. An opening move, her breath caught in her throat. He had answered. The janitor, the ghost from last night, had silently, boldly accepted her challenge. Her heart began to pound, not with anger, but with a sudden, sharp thrill. This wasn't a joke anymore. This was a declaration. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. This was a language she understood. Reaching out a manicured finger, she pushed her own white king's pawn forward 2 spaces to meet his. The game was on. Jamal got off the last bus of the night and walked the quiet street to his small rental house. He unlocked the door quietly, but he wasn't quiet enough. "You're home late," a voice called from the couch. Amara was curled under a blanket. Her tight coils of natural hair were a messy halo around her face. Her sketchbook was open in her lap. "Did the building need extra polishing?" "Something like that," Jamal said, forcing a casual tone as he hung up his jacket. He walked over and kissed the top of her head. "What are you drawing, Amara?" She held up the book. It was a drawing of a queen, a chess piece, but this one wore a sad expression. "She's trapped," Amara said simply. "The bad guys are all around her." Jamal felt a familiar pang in his chest. "Looks like she needs a good plan." "She needs a knight," Amara corrected him. She looked up at him, her eyes sharp and serious. "You look different tonight, Dad. Your eyes are loud." He almost laughed. "Loud eyes? That's a new one." "They are like you're thinking really hard about something you're not supposed to." She knew him too well. He was the only parent she had, and she'd learned to read his silences like a book. "Just tired," he lied. "Can we play checkers?" she asked, her voice hopeful. "Or that other game, the one you taught me the moves to but never play with me?" There it was, the question he always dreaded. "It's too late, sweetie. School night." "You always say that," she murmured, her disappointment clear. She didn't push it. She never did. She just retreated back into her drawing, leaving him in the silence she'd created. He went into the small kitchen, his mind a whirlwind. He saw the face of the woman from the lobby, Katerina Devo. He'd seen her picture in the papers, a corporate shark, a ruthless ace, and now his opponent. He had made a vow 10 years ago, a promise sealed in the fires of a terrible accident that he would never play again. The game had taken everything from him, his wife, his future, his soul. He had chosen this quiet life, this ghost life, for a reason, to keep Amara safe from the man he used to be. But the woman with the angry eyes had made a move. She had unwittingly knocked on the door of a tomb he had sealed long ago, and last night, to his own horror, he had answered. The next few days passed in a silent, escalating war. Every morning, Katerina would come down to the lobby, her stomach tight with anticipation, and every morning a single black piece would be in a new position, a move more brilliant and audacious than the last. He wasn't just playing to win, he was telling a story. He sacrificed a knight in a breathtaking gambit that left her exposed in a way she hadn't been since her first year on Wall Street. He built a fortress of pawns that was both an elegant defense and a quiet threat. Her work began to fray at the edges. During a tense negotiation over a tech acquisition, she found herself staring at the patterns in the mahogany grain of the boardroom table, seeing them as lines of attack on a chessboard. Katerina, she snapped back to attention. Dominic Sullivan was sitting across from her, a perfectly tailored wolf in a $1,000 suit. His smile was polished, but his eyes were pure calculation. "You seem distracted," Dominic said, his voice a smooth purr. "Something on your mind?" "Just dismantling your laughably lowball offer," she retorted, her voice pure ice. He chuckled. "Always the fighter. Your father says that's why you need a partner to temper your aggression." "My father can run his mouth and his own portfolio. I'll run my company." "Of course," Dominic said, leaning forward. "But our fathers both agree. A merger between our firms, solidified by a more personal union, would be the greatest legacy of our generation." He glanced past her out the glass walls of the conference room toward the lobby. "Still playing with your toys, I see." Katerina followed his gaze to the chessboard below. "It keeps my mind sharp." "A mind like yours doesn't need sharpening," he said, standing up as the meeting concluded. "It needs a king to protect. Think about it, Katerina." She watched him leave, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach. He wasn't just a suitor. He was a predator, and he was using her own father to corner her. Later that day, she called her head of security, a former Mossad agent named Oren, into her office. "I need a background check," she said, not looking up from her screen, "on one of our janitors." Oren, a man who rarely showed surprise, allowed one of his eyebrows to twitch. "A janitor?" "Jamal Mitchell, third shift. I want everything. Where he was born, where he went to school, what he ate for breakfast, every job he's ever had, every place he's ever lived. I want to know who he is." "Is he a threat?" Oren asked, his voice low. Katerina thought of the Black Knight now poised to fork her queen and her rook. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's what I need you to find out." "What was Mommy like?" Jamal looked up from the dishes he was washing. Amara was sitting at the kitchen table, an old photo album opened in front of her. It was one of the few he hadn't packed away. "She was like sunshine, Amara," he said, his voice soft. "Did she like games?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He stopped scrubbing the plate, his knuckles white. "Why do you ask?" "I found this," she said, pointing to a faded photograph tucked into the plastic sleeve. It was from another life. A much younger Jamal sat at a chessboard, surrounded by a crowd of people, their faces a blur of awe and concentration. He was holding a large, gaudy trophy, and standing beside him, her arm looped through his, was his wife, laughing. "Who are all those people watching you?" Amara asked, her small finger tracing his face in the picture. "And what's that cup for?" Jamal quickly dried his hands and walked over, closing the album with a gentle but firm finality. "That was a long time ago before you." "Were you famous?" "No," he said too quickly. "It was just a club, a hobby." "You don't have hobbies now," she stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "You're my hobby," he said, trying to steer them into safer waters. He tapped her nose. "A very expensive and time-consuming hobby." She didn't smile. "Mommy looks happy in that picture. You both do." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "You don't look like that anymore, Dad." He had no answer for that. He just tucked the album away on a high shelf, a place where the ghosts couldn't reach them. But it was too late. One was already loose in his house, and another was waiting for him in a glass tower downtown. 2 days later, an encrypted file appeared on Katerina's desktop. The subject line was a single word, Mitchell. She dimmed the lights in her office, her heart hammering against her ribs. She clicked it open. The file was thin. Jamal Mitchell, born in Cardiff, Wales, immigrated to the U.S. at 16. Naturalized citizen, high school diploma, a string of menial jobs for the past 10 years. No criminal record, no credit cards. He paid for everything in cash. He was on paper a ghost, a nobody. But Oren was the best for a reason. He always found something. Katerina scrolled to the bottom of the file to a section labeled Anomalies and Unverified Data. There was a single blurry newspaper clipping from an international source dated over a decade ago. The headline was in Russian, but the subheading below it was in English. Where is Jamal Mitchell? The ghost of Cardiff vanishes before World Championship match. Beneath it was a photo. It was the same one Amara had found in the album, a younger, smiling Jamal holding a trophy. Katerina leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. The ghost of Cardiff, not a janitor, not a nobody. He was a grandmaster, a world-class legendary player who had simply disappeared, and she had challenged him to a game of chess. She had taunted a sleeping dragon, and now he was awake. A slow, dangerous smile crept across her lips. This changed everything. That night, Katerina didn't go home. She waited. She sent her driver away, canceled her late-night calls, and sat in the dark of her office, watching the lobby below like a hawk. At precisely 11:45 p.m., Jamal Mitchell emerged from the service corridor, his cleaning cart rolling silently beside him. He moved with a quiet efficiency, wiping down glass panels and polishing brass fixtures, saving the chessboard for last. When he finally approached the pedestal, Katerina descended in the silent glass elevator. Arriving behind him without a sound, he was studying the board, his head tilted. He hadn't made his move yet. The ghost of Cardiff, she said, her voice low and steady. Jamal froze for a fraction of a second. It was the only sign he'd heard her. He didn't turn around. His shoulders seemed to slump as if a great weight had just settled on them. They said you were the most creative player since Tal, she continued, walking slowly around the board to face him. That you played with a kind of beautiful tragic intuition. Then you vanished. You left the game right when you were about to take the crown. He finally lifted his head and his eyes were full of a cold, ancient weariness. That person is dead. He doesn't look dead to me, she countered, gesturing at the board between them. He's been slowly and systematically destroying me for 3 days. The ghost gambit. An interesting choice for a man trying to stay invisible. A muscle twitched in his jaw. This was a mistake. He reached out, his dark brown hand hovering over his king as if to tip it over in resignation. Don't you dare, she snapped, her voice sharp with an intensity that surprised her. Don't you dare walk away. Not again. He pulled his hand back, looking at her with genuine confusion. Why? Why does this matter to you? It was a joke, a cruel joke. It's over. It stopped being a joke the moment you moved that pawn, she said, stepping closer. For the last 10 years, my life has been a series of predictable, boring transactions. Mergers, acquisitions, hostile takeovers. I have fought off every shark in this city, and not one of them has ever made me feel as alive as I have felt for the last 72 hours waiting for your next move. You are the first real opponent I have ever had. So, no, it's not over. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I have nothing to offer you. You have the game, she said simply. That's all I want. See it through to the end. Whatever the stakes, you owe the game that much. He stared at her, a storm of conflict raging in his eyes. He looked like a man being asked to stand on the edge of a cliff he'd barely survived falling from once before. He gave no answer, instead turning his back to her and walking away, leaving the board and his move unfinished. My dad's a janitor. The words came from a boy named Kyle, whose father owned a string of car dealerships. He said it loud enough for the whole lunch table to hear. Amara Mitchell kept her eyes glued to the tuna sandwich in her hands, her dark brown cheeks burning. He cleans toilets, Kyle's friends sneered. He does not, Amara said quietly. He works in a really big, shiny building downtown. He polishes the floors. Wow, a floor polisher, Kyle laughed. So fancy. Amara's hands clenched into fists under the table. My dad is smart, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He's really, really smart. Kyle rolled his eyes. Yeah, right. If he's so smart, why is he a janitor? Amara had no answer. She just sat there taking the verbal blows, wishing she could disappear. She knew her dad was smart. She could feel it. It was in the way he talked to her, the way he could fix anything that broke, the way his eyes sometimes got that loud look, like there was a whole secret world inside his head. But she had no proof. To the world, to kids like Kyle, he was just a janitor. And she was just the janitor's weird, quiet daughter. That evening when Jamal came to tuck her in, she was quiet. Everything okay at school? He asked, smoothing her natural coils back from her forehead. It was fine, she mumbled into her pillow. She waited a moment, then asked, Dad, were you ever important? The question hung in the air between them. Jamal went still. What do you mean? Like, did you ever do something that a lot of people knew about? Something that would make a kid like Kyle shut his big, stupid mouth. He sat on the edge of her bed, his face etched with pain. He knew. He knew she was being teased. This was his greatest fear. Realized that his choice to hide from the world would leave her with no shield against it. Being important isn't about what other people think, Amara, he said softly. It's about being a good person, about being there for the people you love. But were you? She pressed, her voice small. Ever important? He hesitated for a long time. Once, he finally whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. I was once. He kissed her forehead. Get some sleep. He left her room and stood in the hallway, leaning his head against the wall. He was trying to protect her, but all he was doing was leaving her defenseless. He had run from his crown, from his name, from the ghost of his wife, all to build a safe, simple life. But simplicity was a lie. The world was not simple. It was cruel, and it was loud, and his silence was not enough to protect her from it. The next morning, Katerina walked into the lobby with a sense of dread. She was sure he would be gone, that he would have quit his job, vanished again, leaving the game unfinished. She approached the board, her heart pounding. His move had not been made. The pieces were just as they had been when she left him. A wave of disappointment, so sharp it felt like grief, washed over her. He had run, but then she saw it. Tucked just under the edge of the board was a small folded piece of paper. It wasn't a note of resignation. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It wasn't words. It was notation. 4. Coup 4. A move so unorthodox, so risky, it was practically poetry. It was an answer to her challenge. It was an answer to his daughter's question. It was the move of a man who had just decided to stop hiding. Katerina stared at the notation. Coup 4. It wasn't just a move. It was a statement. It was a move of breathtaking aggression, leaving his own king vulnerable, all for a powerful attack. It was the move of a man who had nothing left to lose or had just decided to fight for everything. The game had just moved off the board and into the shadows. It was their secret now. She took a pen from her purse and on the back of his note she wrote her reply. 5. A 3. A standard solid defense. A question. Are you sure about this? She folded the paper and tucked it back where she had found it. The silent war of notes continued for a week. He would leave his move on a slip of paper tucked into the foliage of a lobby plant. She would leave her reply taped to the underside of his cleaning cart's handle. It was a dangerous, intimate correspondence. His moves were brilliant, poetic, and deeply unsettling. He played with a raw, emotional honesty that her logical, structured mind struggled to comprehend. But she was learning. She was starting to see the patterns, not just on the board, but in the man himself. Her focus on the secret game, however, left her exposed in the real world. One Tuesday morning, she walked into the office to find chaos. The headline of the Wall Street Journal was a dagger to the heart. Is Devo Holdings faltering? CEO Katerina Devo's leadership questioned amid stagnant growth. The article was full of anonymous quotes from concerned board members and high-level insiders. It was a coordinated attack. It was Dominic Sullivan's work. He wasn't just trying to court her anymore. He was trying to gut her, to force her into a position where marrying him was her only option. Her office phone buzzed. The display read FATHER. She let it ring 3 times before answering, her voice a flat, cold monotone. Yes. Did you see it? Her father's voice boomed, crackling with fury. He's making his move, Katerina, and you are sitting there playing with your goddamn toys. I've had calls all morning. The board is spooked. The board is a collection of old men who are afraid of a woman who doesn't ask for their permission, she shot back. This is a man's game, Katerina. You are playing it like a girl, he roared. Dominic has the votes to call for a review of your leadership. He is going to gut you. Your only move is to accept the merger. Accept him. It is the only way to protect the Devo name. I am the Devo name, she said quietly and hung up the phone. Her hands were shaking. He was right. She was trapped. Dominic had her in a checkmate she couldn't see a way out of. Kyle pushed Amara on the playground today, Amara said, poking at her fish sticks. Kyle did. Did you tell a teacher? Amara told. Mrs. Davidson made Kyle apologize. He didn't mean it. She looked up at Jamal. He's just loud. All he does is yell and push, and everyone gets scared and does what he wants. Jamal looked at his daughter, really looked at her. He saw the frustration in her eyes, the feeling of helplessness. He saw himself. Kyle has a weakness, Amara, he said softly. He does? Yes, he's predictable. He only knows one way to fight. Straight ahead with noise and force. He leaned forward. You don't fight a man like that by getting in a shouting match. You use his own momentum against him. You step aside, let him charge past, and then you push him from behind when he's not looking. Amara's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face as she understood the strategy. So, I should push him? No. Jamal chuckled. I'm not telling you to push him. I'm telling you to think. Find his weakness. He wants you to be scared. The most powerful thing you can do is not be. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was giving his daughter something real. Not just food and shelter, but a piece of the part of him he had kept locked away. He was teaching her how to see the board. The next evening, Katerina found Jamal's move written on the back of a discarded work order slip left on her desk. BXF 7+. Check. It was a sacrifice, a brilliant, stunning sacrifice. He was giving up a powerful piece, his bishop, just to pull her king out into the open. It was corporate suicide. It was madness. But as she stared at the notation, she saw the deeper play. 3 moves ahead, 4 moves ahead. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a trap. A devastating, beautiful trap. At that moment, her assistant buzzed. Miss Devo, the board is waiting. She walked into the boardroom. The air was thick with hostility. Her father sat at the far end of the table, his face a mask of thunder. Dominic Sullivan was there, invited as a guest, looking like a wolf who had just cornered its prey. The board has reviewed Mr. Sullivan's proposal. One of the older members began, avoiding her eyes. In light of the recent instability, we believe it is the most prudent path forward. They were voting her out. They were handing her company, her life's work, to her enemy. She was in check. She listened to them lay out their case, their voices droning on. All she could see was the notation on the slip of paper in her pocket. BSS 7+. Sacrifice the bishop. Katerina. Her father's voice cut through the haze. Do you have anything to say before we call the vote? She stood up, her heart pounding. She looked at Dominic, at her father, at the circle of men ready to devour her. Yes, she said, her voice clear and ringing with a newfound confidence. I do. I reject the premise of this meeting, and I have a counter proposal. We're not going to merge with Sullivan's firm. We're going to acquire it, and we're going to use their own debt to do it. The room erupted in chaos. It was a move so audacious, so risky, it was insane. It was corporate suicide. But as she looked at Dominic Sullivan's shocked, furious face, Katerina smiled. It was the move of a woman who had just decided to stop playing defense. She was sacrificing her bishop, and she was about to pull a king out into the open. The boardroom exploded. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of shock and outrage. Acquire Sullivan Capital? Are you insane? One board member sputtered. He'd never sell, and we don't have the capital for a hostile takeover, another shouted. Dominic Sullivan, who had been enjoying his victory lap, was now staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief. This is a joke, a desperate, pathetic bluff. Is it, Dominic? Katerina said, her voice cutting through the noise like a razor. She walked to the head of the table, projecting an authority that silenced the room. I've spent the last week analyzing the debt structure you used to acquire 3 smaller tech firms last year. It's over-leveraged, brilliantly hidden, I'll admit, but one sharp downturn in the European market, and your entire house of cards comes tumbling down. She looked around at the stunned faces. I've already spoken with my bankers. We initiate a short position. We leak the details of your toxic debt to the right people. And within 48 hours, your market value will be half of what it is today. At which point, we won't need to buy you. We will simply collect you. Her father was on his feet, his face purple with rage. This is reckless. You're putting this family's entire fortune at risk based on a gamble. Everything you've ever done was a gamble, Katerina said, her eyes locking with his. The only difference is you always hedged your bets. I'm going all in. She had them. She could feel the shift in the room. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by something else, a reluctant, greedy awe. She had shown them a path to victory they had never imagined. The meeting was adjourned, the vote postponed. She had bought herself time. That night, she found Jamal in the deserted 4th-floor break room, refilling a vending machine. I did it, she said, her voice breathless. The sacrifice, I laid the trap. Jamal stopped what he was doing, turning to face her slowly. The look on his face wasn't pride or excitement, it was fear. What did you do? I told the board, we're launching a hostile takeover of Sullivan Capital. I'm using your strategy. I'm going to use his own debt to bankrupt him. Jamal stared at her, horrified. That was a move in a game, Miss Devo. On a board with pieces of ivory and wood. This isn't a game. These are companies, people's jobs, their lives. It has always been a game, she insisted, stepping closer. The only difference is that you're the first person who's taught me there's more than one way to win. My way was logical, cold, predictable. Your way, it's art, it's courage. I can't see the rest of the board, Jamal. I can see the next move, but you see the whole board. I can't win this war without you. She was asking him. The CEO of Devo Holdings was asking her janitor for strategic advice to win a multi-billion-dollar corporate war. No, he said, shaking his head and backing away. I can't. I won't. That part of my life is over. Find another way. He turned and left her standing there under the flickering fluorescent lights, the silence of her victory suddenly feeling cold and hollow. The next day at recess, Kyle and his friends were guarding the basketball court, not letting any of the younger kids play. Amara watched from the sidelines, her heart thumping. She remembered her father's words. He's predictable. Find his weakness. Amara walked up to him, not with fear, but with a calm curiosity. Hey, Kyle, she said. That's a cool watch. Kyle puffed out his chest, pleased with the attention. It's a new Stratus. My dad got it for me. It's waterproof to 200 feet. Wow, Amara said, her eyes wide with fake admiration. Can it tell the time in Japan? Yeah, probably. He stammered, starting to fiddle with the buttons. He didn't know how to work it. That was his weakness. He liked to show off things he didn't understand. While he was distracted, fumbling with the complex settings, Amara gestured for the other kids to run onto the court behind him. By the time Kyle looked up, the game had started without him. He was left standing on the sidelines, looking flustered and foolish. He hadn't been beaten by force, but by a quiet, simple strategy. Amara smiled. It was the best move she'd ever made. That night, Jamal walked through the silent lobby of Devo Holdings, his mind in turmoil. He had to end it. He would leave one final note for Katerina, a resignation from this madness. He couldn't be the ghost in her machine. He had his own daughter to worry about. He was just a janitor. That's all he wanted to be. He reached the pedestal and pulled out a small notepad, ready to write the words that would set him free. But as he stood there, the main glass door slid open. Two figures stepped in from the darkness. It was Katerina's father, and with him, Dominic Sullivan. They thought they were alone. "The board is wavering," her father said, his voice a low growl. "Her little stunt impressed some of the younger fools." "Let her play her games," Dominic replied with a smug, chilling confidence. "She's right about the debt. It's a vulnerability. But she doesn't know about the shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. When she makes her move, we trigger the sale. The Shell Corp buys all of Sullivan Capital's voting shares for pennies on the dollar. I'll still be in control. And the Devo funds she uses for the attack. They'll be tied up in litigation for the next decade. She won't just lose. She'll be wiped out. The board will have no choice but to remove her and appoint someone more stable. You," her father said. "And you'll be chairman emeritus with your legacy secure," Dominic confirmed. "She'll be left with nothing." Jamal shrank back into the shadows behind a large marble pillar, his heart pounding. This wasn't a corporate battle. It was a betrayal. A father conspiring with a predator to utterly destroy his own daughter. They weren't just trying to win, they were trying to erase her. He watched them get into the elevator, their laughter echoing in the silent lobby. He looked down at the notepad in his hand. The resignation he was about to write forgotten. He couldn't walk away now. He was the only person in the world who knew their plan. He was the only piece on the board they hadn't accounted for. He tore off the sheet of paper and crumpled it in his fist. On a fresh sheet, he wrote two simple characters, his handwriting firm and clear. KG7, King to G7. A quiet move, a defensive move, a move that gets your king out of the line of fire, preparing for the storm you know is coming. Katerina's hands were shaking when she found the note. She had been bracing herself for his resignation all day. Instead, she found two simple characters, KG7, King to G7. It was a quiet move, a defensive one. It was the move a player makes when they sense a coming attack from a direction they can't yet see. It was a warning, and it meant he was still in the game. He hadn't run. She couldn't rely on cryptic notes anymore. This was moving too fast. That afternoon, she pulled Jamal Mitchell's employee file. It listed a cell phone number. For an hour, she stared at it, her finger hovering over the call button on her own phone. Calling him would shatter the strange, sacred boundary of their game. It would make it real. Finally, she took a deep breath and pressed the button. It rang twice. "Hello?" His voice was hesitant, laced with caution. "It's Katerina Devo," she said, her own voice sounding foreign to her. "We need to talk. Not here. Somewhere else." Silence. She could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. A cartoon, maybe. "I can't," he said. "I'm with my daughter." "After she's asleep," Katerina insisted, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "There's a 24-hour diner, the Red Comet on 12th Street, 10 p.m. Please, Jamal." She had used his first name. Another line crossed. She waited, her entire empire, her entire life, hanging on the silence of a janitor in a small suburban house. "Okay," he finally said, and hung up. The Red Comet diner smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Katerina sat in a cracked vinyl booth in the back, a cup of untouched black coffee in front of her. She had never felt more out of place. At 10:02, Jamal slid into the booth opposite her. He was wearing a simple gray hoodie and jeans, and he looked exhausted. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. "What's the new move?" "There is no new move," she said, leaning forward. "That's what your note told me. You're telling me to get my king to safety to prepare for an attack. What did you see?" Jamal looked around the empty diner, then met her gaze. His eyes were dark with the weight of what he was about to say. "Last night I saw your father. He was with Dominic Sullivan in the lobby." Katerina felt a cold dread wash over her. "They're working together," Jamal said, his voice flat. "Sullivan knows your plan is a trap. He's letting you walk into it. He has a shell corporation in the Caymans. When you short his stock, the shell company will buy all of his voting shares. He'll retain control, and your funds, your company's funds, will be gone, tied up in legal battles you can't win." He took a breath. "They're not trying to beat you, Miss Devo. They're planning to erase you." The words hit her harder than any stock market crash. Betrayal. It was a clean, sharp, physical pain. She had always known her father was ruthless, but this was monstrous, to conspire with her worst enemy to utterly destroy his own child. For the first time in her adult life, she felt the hot sting of tears welling in her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, but Jamal had seen. His expression softened, the hard lines of fear around his eyes melting into something else. Pity, or maybe empathy. "We need a new game," she whispered, her voice cracking. "There is no we," he started to say, but the words died on his lips. He had made the choice when he wrote that note. He was already in it. "You are the only person on this planet I can trust right now," she said, the admission costing her dearly. "My father, my board, my rivals, they're all on the other side of the board. You're the only one on my side." He looked at her, at the raw vulnerability that had finally broken through her armor of steel. In that brightly lit, empty diner, Jamal felt the weight of being the only black man in her circle of trust, the unlikely anchor to her storm. He gave a slow, reluctant nod. He was no longer her janitor, her phantom opponent. He was her only ally. That weekend, Jamal brought home a box. Amara looked up from the TV. "What's that?" He opened it and pulled out a simple roll-up vinyl chessboard and a set of plastic pieces. He unrolled it on the kitchen table. "I thought it was time I taught you properly," he said. Amara's eyes went wide. She scrambled to the table, her face lit up with a joy that made Jamal's heart ache. He was finally sharing his world with her. He started showing her the moves again, but this time it was different. He talked about strategy, about thinking ahead. "Most people think the queen is the most powerful piece," he explained, holding up the elegant plastic figure. "And she is. She can go anywhere she wants, but she's also the biggest target. Everyone is always watching the queen." He picked up a small, insignificant pawn. But a pawn, nobody watches the pawns. They ignore them. But if a pawn can make it all the way to the other side of the board without anyone stopping it, he moved the piece, square by square, across the board until it reached the final rank. It can become a queen. Sometimes the most powerful move in the game is the one nobody sees coming. Amara looked from the pawn to her father, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. Later that night, Katerina sat with Jamal in the empty executive conference room, spreadsheets and corporate ownership documents spread across the table instead of a chessboard. Her aggressive takeover plan was in ruins. "We can't attack," she said, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "Any move we make, they'll use it against us. We're in Zugzwang. Any move is a bad one." Jamal was silent, studying a complex chart of Devo Holdings' own subsidiaries. His eyes were tracing lines connecting dots she couldn't see. For 10 minutes, he said nothing, and then he tapped a single finger on a small box at the very bottom of the chart. It was a logistics company, a small, wholly owned subsidiary that handled shipping for a few of their manufacturing assets. It was a rounding error in their multi-billion-dollar portfolio. A pawn. "The attack won't come from a queen or a rook," Jamal said softly, his voice full of a sudden chilling certainty. "It will come from here." Katerina stared at the small box on the chart. DXL Logistics. "Jamal, that's a trucking company. It's a rounding error. It moves shipping containers. How can that be our attack?" "Because they're not watching it," Jamal said, his voice quiet but intense. "Dominic and your father, they're looking for a queen to attack. A major financial move, a hostile bid from your main investment division. They have defenses for that. They would never ever look at a pawn." He slid a separate document across the table. It was a list of DXL's shipping contracts. His finger stopped on one name, Helios Manufacturing. "Dominic doesn't own Helios," Katerina said, confused. "I checked all his holdings." "No, he doesn't," Jamal agreed. "But Helios is the sole supplier of micro-housings for Ethel Technologies, and Ethel Red is the company whose debt Dominic used to over-lever his last acquisition. If Ethel's production stalls, their stock value plummets." "And if their stock plummets, the loans get called in," Katerina finished, her eyes wide with understanding, "and Dominic's entire financial house of cards collapses." "We don't attack Dominic," Jamal said. "We don't attack Ethel Red. We simply have DXL Logistics terminate its contract with Helios, cite rising fuel costs, and route inefficiencies. It's a standard, boring business decision. A tiny move on the other side of the board that no one will connect to you until it's too late. By the time Dominic realizes his queen is in danger, it will be because a single pawn has already reached the other side. It was breathtaking. It was the most brilliant and devious strategy she had ever seen. For the next 3 nights, they worked out of the executive conference room, a strange pair huddled over documents and coffee, the CEO and the janitor. Jamal would point out a strategic connection, and Katerina would navigate the complex legal and financial language to make it happen. He saw the board. She moved the pieces. In between tense phone calls and encrypted emails, they talked. She learned about his wife's love for terrible action movies. He learned that Katerina's favorite food was a cheap hot dog from a street cart she used to visit with her mother. The lines between them blurred. He wasn't her janitor. He was Jamal. She wasn't his boss. She was Katerina. His late nights at the office didn't go unnoticed at home. "Working on the big puzzle again, Dad?" Amara asked one evening as he came in long after her bedtime. She was sitting up in bed waiting for him. "Yeah," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "It's a tricky one. Is your friend winning?" "I think we are," he said, a small tired smile on his face. He handed her a small chocolate bar from the vending machine of the shiny building. Amara beamed and hugged him tightly. "You're a good knight, Dad." The plan worked faster than they could have imagined. DXL terminated the contract. Helios Manufacturing's supply chain was thrown into chaos. Ethel Technologies' stock began to wobble, and Dominic Sullivan was completely blindsided. He stormed into a meeting with Katerina's father, his usual smug confidence replaced by a wild, paranoid fury. "What is she doing?" he snarled. "I can't see her move. My lenders are getting spooked about the Ethel Red portfolio, but there's no trace of Devo Holdings anywhere near it. It's like the market is having a heart attack for no reason." "Calm down, Dominic," Katerina's father said, though he too was confused. "The trap is set. Sooner or later she has to make a real move, and when she does, we'll be ready." On the 4th night, Katerina and Jamal stood before the large glass window of her office, looking down at the city lights. An alert had just come through. Ethol All Red stock had dropped 17%. The first margin calls against Dominic's fund would be triggered in the morning. They had done it. "My father always said business was war," Katerina said softly, her voice full of wonder. "You play it like it's music." She looked at him, and in the dim light of the office, the last of her defenses crumbled. The gratitude, the admiration, the sheer awe she felt for this quiet, brilliant man was overwhelming. He wasn't just her ally, he was becoming something more. He met her gaze, and for the first time, he smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached his loud eyes. It was a moment of pure, silent victory. The piercing ring of her private office phone shattered it. She frowned and walked over to the desk, putting it on speaker. "This is Devo. I know you're with him." It was her father. His voice was dangerously quiet, stripped of its usual bluster, and replaced with something far colder. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her blood turning to ice. "Don't lie to me, Katerina. I've had a man watching you for a week. I have pictures of you and the janitor huddled together in my conference room for 3 nights straight." There was a pause. "The board will be very interested to know their CEO is taking strategic advice from the help. It's over." The line went dead. She stared at the phone, then looked at Jamal, her face pale with horror. He had seen her trap, but she had never seen his. Check. The silence in the office was a living thing, cold and suffocating. Katerina stared at the phone, then at Jamal. The color had drained from her face. "He knows," she whispered. "He's had me followed." Her first instinct, primal and protective, kicked in. "You have to go, Jamal. Now leave the building. He'll destroy you. He'll have you fired. He'll—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She knew the depths of her father's cruelty. He would go after Amara. Jamal stood motionless, his face unreadable. She expected to see the old fear in his eyes, the familiar instinct to retreat, to become a ghost again. But it wasn't there. The man looking back at her now was not the one she had met a few weeks ago. The weariness was still there, but underneath it was a foundation of solid steel. "No," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Don't be a fool," she urged, her voice rising with panic. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I spent 10 years running," he said, looking at her directly. "I ran from my wife's memory. I ran from the game. I ran from myself. I let my daughter believe her father was nothing more than the man who cleans the floors. I'm not running anymore." He took a step toward her. "We finished the game, our way." The next morning, she was summoned not to the boardroom, but to the private family lounge on the top floor. Her father was there along with 2 of his oldest, most loyal board members. Dominic Sullivan sat beside him, looking like a king who had already won. Her father didn't waste time. He tossed a manila envelope onto the polished table. It slid to a stop in front of her. "Open it," he commanded. Her hands trembled slightly as she did. Inside were a dozen high-resolution photographs, her and Jamal in the conference room, heads bent together over documents. Her and Jamal in the diner, leaning forward in intense conversation. They were innocuous, but in the hands of her father, they were weapons. "A touching friendship," her father sneered. "The billionaire CEO and the janitor. A beautiful story for the tabloids. How do you think our shareholders will react when they learn the new strategy for this company was developed by the man who mops the bathrooms?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Here is my final offer. You will announce your engagement to Dominic by the end of the week. You will step down as CEO and take a non-executive position on the board. You will hand control of the company over to him. If you refuse, these pictures, along with a detailed report on your erratic behavior, go public. The board will have you removed for cause, and your janitor friend. I will personally ensure he never works in this city again. I will make a call to social services. I will make them question if a man with no job and no prospects is a fit parent for a young girl. A single black father with no visible income. I know exactly which buttons to push, Katerina. Do you understand me, Katerina?" It was a perfect checkmate. He had attacked her from every possible angle. Her career, her reputation, and worst of all, he had aimed a weapon directly at Jamal and an innocent child. Defeat tasted like bile in her throat. She felt hollowed out, beaten. She looked at Dominic. He was smiling, a triumphant, possessive gleam in his eyes. It was over. She had lost. That night, she met Jamal on a deserted park bench overlooking the river. The air was cold. She told him everything. "I have to take his offer," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "It's the only move. He's put me in checkmate." "Ah!" Jamal was silent for a long time, watching the lights of the city dance on the dark water. "He hasn't," he said finally. "What? Jamal, did you hear me? He's threatening to ruin you, to take Amara away from you." "I heard you," he said calmly. "He thinks he's attacking you with a pawn. He spent this whole game underestimating his opponent. That's his weakness. It's always been his weakness. He thinks he's exposing you with a janitor. Let's show him he's picked a fight with a king he thought was dead." "What are you talking about?" "We call a press conference," Jamal said, the plan forming in his mind as he spoke. "We don't deny a thing. We don't hide. We reframe the entire narrative. Your father thinks the story as CEO has secret affair with janitor. We tell them the real story." Katerina Devo, in a brilliant strategic move, uncovered the hidden genius of Jamal Mitchell, the reclusive chess grandmaster known as the Ghost of Cardiff, and enlisted him as her secret advisor to save her company from a hostile takeover. We don't run from the pictures. We use them as proof of our alliance. It was the ultimate gambit, an all-or-nothing, beautiful, terrifying move that could either be their salvation or their mutual destruction. She looked at this man who weeks ago was a ghost, now willing to step back into the light to face the glare of the entire world, all for her, for this game. She was on the verge of surrendering. She was ready to fold, but looking at him now, she saw a different path. A terrifying path, a winning path. "What's the move, Jamal?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He looked her straight in the eye. "We knock over the whole board." Katerina looked at Jamal, at the impossible, terrifying plan reflected in his steady eyes. For her entire life, she had played by the rules of a game her father had created. She had played for money, for power, for survival, but she had never played for freedom, until now. A slow smile touched her lips. It was the smile of a queen who had just realized she didn't have to stay on her side of the board. Asterisk, asterisk. All right, Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice clear and strong. Let's knock it over. The next 24 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Katerina moved with a speed and ferocity that left her staff breathless. She booked the grand ballroom at the Regis Hotel for a press conference. She had her legal team draft injunctions. She and Jamal worked side by side at her penthouse, not her office, surrounded by takeout containers and financial reports. They wrote the speech together, crafting every word like a move in their final game. The night before the press conference, Jamal went home to have the most important conversation of his life. He found Amara finishing her homework at the kitchen table. "Amara, can we talk?" he asked, sitting down opposite her. "Are we in trouble?" she asked, her eyes wide. "No, not at all," he said gently. "Remember how you asked me if I was ever important?" She nodded. "Well," he took a deep breath. "Tomorrow, a lot of people are going to find out that I was. There's going to be a lot of noise, people on TV, pictures in the paper, and they're going to say a lot of things. But I need you to know that none of it changes the two most important facts in the world. I am your dad, and I love you more than anything." Amara looked at him, digesting this. "Is this about the puzzle you were helping your friend with?" "It is," he said. "We're about to make our last move." "Okay," she said with a solemn nod. "Then you have to win." The ballroom was packed. It felt like the entire financial world was crammed into one room, buzzing with speculation and smelling of expensive cologne and greed. In the front row, looking smug and victorious, sat her father and Dominic Sullivan. They were here to watch her public execution. They thought she had called this press conference to announce her surrender, her engagement to Dominic. Katerina walked onto the stage, the glare of the lights blinding. She felt a moment of pure terror. Then she felt a strange calm settle over her. She was no longer a piece in her father's game. She was a player. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "I'm sure you are all wondering why I've called you here today. In recent weeks, there have been questions about my leadership. Rumors have circulated. Threats have been made against my company by Mr. Dominic Sullivan." She paused, letting her eyes sweep over the room before landing on Dominic. "And I am here to tell you that those rumors are true." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Her father's smile widened. This was it, her confession. "It is true," she continued, "that I have been seeking the counsel of a close personal advisor, someone whose strategic mind is without equal. It is his guidance that has allowed Devo Holdings to navigate the treacherous waters of Mr. Sullivan's hostile attacks." She gestured to the side of the stage, "And I would like to introduce him to you now, a man many of you in the world of chess believed was lost forever. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Jamal Mitchell, also known as the Ghost of Cardiff." As Jamal walked out from the wings, he was wearing a simple dark gray suit that Katerina had insisted on. He wasn't smiling. He looked serious, dignified, and completely in command of himself. The room erupted. Camera flashes exploded like fireworks. Journalists were shouting, scrambling, some staring in open-mouthed disbelief. The financial reporters were confused, but the older sports and games reporters were on their feet. The ghost. He was real. He was here. Dominic and her father were frozen, their faces a comical mask of pure shock. The weapon they thought they held, the shame of the janitor, had just been revealed to be a crown jewel. Jamal walked not to the podium, but to a large digital screen. He didn't say a word. He simply projected an image onto the screen. The final position of his legendary unfinished championship match from 10 years prior. "In this position," he said, his voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone, "Black is in what appears to be a losing position. The white player is attacking on all sides. Any defensive move leads to a slow, inevitable death. He then swiped the screen. A new image appeared, a simplified chart of Devo Holdings' assets versus Sullivan Capital's attack. The parallels were unmistakable. My opponent, Mr. Sullivan, played a classic aggressive game, Jamal continued. He believed Miss Devo would respond with a classic defense, but he misjudged his opponent. With a final swipe, he circled a single brilliant move on the old chessboard, a move no one had seen 10 years ago. Then he circled the DXL Logistics subsidiary on the corporate chart. The only winning move was not to defend, Jamal stated. It was to launch a quiet, unexpected counterattack from a piece your opponent has long since forgotten about. It is not about saving your king. It is about recognizing that your smallest pawn has had the power to become a queen all along. He had laid it bare for the entire world to see. This wasn't a scandal. It was a masterclass in strategy. He had checkmated them not on a board, but on the front page of every newspaper in the country. As the press conference ended in a frenzy, reporters mobbing the stage awoke. One journalist shouted a question above the din. Mr. Mitchell, Miss Devo made a promise that if you beat her in a game, she'd marry you. Did you win? The crowd quieted, desperate to hear the answer. Jamal looked at Katerina. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a radiant, brilliant smile. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He turned back to the reporter, a small smile playing on his own lips for the first time. The game, he said, his voice just loud enough for the microphones to catch, isn't over yet. The roar of the press faded as they were ushered into a private holding room backstage. The door clicked shut, leaving them in a sudden, surreal silence. For a moment, they just stood there, the adrenaline of the last hour crackling in the air between them. Katerina was the first to break the silence. A laugh, a real, uninhibited laugh, bubbled up from her chest. "We did it!" she gasped, shaking her head in disbelief. "We actually knocked over the whole board." Jamal watched her, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He saw her then, not as the icy CEO or the formidable opponent, but as Katerina, the woman who fought, who felt, who had risked everything on him. Her phone buzzed, and she looked down at the screen. The name on it was Father. She let it go to voicemail. A second later, a text message appeared. It contained only 2 words. You win. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a surrender. The king had tipped his piece. Another text came through, this one from her head of PR. Dominic Sullivan has resigned, effective immediately. His firm stock is in freefall. It was over. The corporate war was won. Asterisk, asterisk. Thank you, Jamal, she said, her voice soft and full of an emotion he'd never heard from her before. You saved me. You saved yourself, he corrected gently. You were the one who had the courage to make the move. They left the hotel through a private exit, stepping out into the cool afternoon air. The world felt different now, brighter. They weren't a secret anymore. They were a headline. When Jamal arrived home that evening, Amara barreled into him the moment he opened the door, wrapping her arms around his legs. I saw you, she squealed, her face buried in his jeans. I saw you on the TV. You were on every channel. Mrs. Davidson called from next door and said you were famous. He knelt and pulled her into a proper hug, burying his face in her tight coils of hair. What did you think? He whispered. Amara pulled back, her eyes shining with fierce pride. You look like a king, Dad. You look like the knight in my drawings, the one who protects the queen. Tears pricked at Jamal's eyes. This was it. This was the only victory that had ever truly mattered. His daughter's respect, her pride. He was no longer a ghost to her. He was a king. A month later, the world of Devo Holdings was a different place. Jamal Mitchell was no longer on the maintenance payroll. He was the firm's chief strategist with a corner office next to Katerina's. He rarely used it, preferring the quiet chaos of the conference room where they had first plotted their impossible victory. His appointment had been a stroke of genius. The story of the reclusive grandmaster who came out of hiding to save the company that employed him was a legend, a PR miracle that had made Devo Holdings the most talked about firm on Wall Street. One evening, Katerina found him in her penthouse. He was standing before a new chessboard, a beautiful antique she had bought made of walnut and rosewood. The pieces from their original game were set up, frozen in the exact position they had been in before the press conference. It was his move. He looked up as she entered. "I thought it was time we finished this," he said. She came and stood beside him, looking at the board. The outcome was inevitable. Her position was hopeless. He had her trapped. His victory a certainty in 5 moves, maybe 6. She studied the board for a long time. The silence comfortable and familiar. Then she reached out, but she didn't touch one of her own pieces. She reached for her king, the ivory cool against her fingertips, and gently tipped it over on its side, the universal sign of resignation, of surrender. "Checkmate," she said softly, a smile in her voice. "You win." Jamal looked at her, his dark eyes warm. "What was the bet again?" he asked, a playful light dancing in them. Katerina laughed, a sound that was full and bright and free. "I believe the offer was my hand in marriage." He stepped closer, reaching across the board to take her hand in his. His touch was warm and steady. "I accept." They didn't just merge companies. They built a new dynasty, one founded not on cold calculation, but on a brilliant and courageous heart. They taught their daughter that strength wasn't about how loudly you shouted, but how cleverly you thought. And they showed the world that sometimes the most powerful and life-changing move is the one that no one, not even you, ever sees coming. And so we come to the end of another journey together. It's always a little quiet after a story finishes, isn't it? I'm always curious what feeling is this story leaving you with right now. It's incredible to think about where these stories travel. So if you feel like sharing, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from in the comments. That's the magic of this, really reminding us that we're all connected, all trying to figure out this messy, beautiful thing called life. If you'd like to be part of this space where we explore those connections, consider subscribing. We're trying to build a small corner of the internet that values empathy. Thank you truly for lending me your time and your attention. It's a gift. Until we meet in the next story, take care of yourself and each other.